Well, good evening. It's like church. Good evening. There we go. I want to extend my welcome with Father Jeff to anyone who might be visiting for the first time, and of course all you regulars, and anyone visiting for Derby Week. This is Derby Week, in case we haven't forgotten. We forgot something like that. So please, we're glad, as Father Jeff likes to say, we are stronger because you are here. I have a quick question to ask, and it's a quick survey. Would you please raise your hand if you have never owned one of these things? Raise your hands if you never have owned one. Oh, one hand, a couple of kids under 4 years old, I think, maybe. Okay, so I got to know my target audience. According to several survey sites that I researched, the average U.S. adult, not teenager, checks their phone up to 150 times a day. Some mental health professionals describe this cell phone usage as a legitimate addiction. Well, see for yourselves. Check your daily screen time. No, not now. Not during my homily, please. And I was really going to share my cell phone usage by Googling how much I'm on there. It was so embarrassing, I'm not going to tell you. Seriously, I have more screen time on this phone than I do getting the recommended sleep at night. So she's not here, so yes, my wife was right. I do have most of all the excuses that you can think of. I need to respond to important emails or texts, especially from my wife or from the church. All right, so that's number one excuse. I need it for directions in the traffic. My wife will get in the car and say, why are you looking for a map when we're going home? And I say, well, there might be an 18-wheeler jackknifed across the interstate. We'll be stuck in traffic for hours. And the other ones I get is, I like checking out what's going on in the world, the news alerts, sad as it may be sometimes, or any notifications of sites that I follow. So those are my excuses. I'll be honest with you, maybe I am slightly addicted to this thing. The survey says that every 10 minutes, people need to check their phones to draw from this source of power that dominates us, that has our contacts, it has our bank account, it has all the things that we like right here. And any of you that have ever been on a retreat, whether it be high school, college, or an adult retreat, for example, a welcome retreat that some of us have been through, one of the first things they do is say, put your phones in the basket, right? They don't want this phone occupying your time getting to know God better. And I suspect that requirement probably keeps some people from going on retreats in high school or college. It's very hard to give this thing up. But anyway, in my old career, there were certain times where we weren't allowed to talk about anything unless we were in a SCIF. A SCIF is SCIF. This is open source information. You can find it all out on the internet. SCIF stood for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. If you can imagine a rectangle, glass, plastic, see-through building about maybe 25 feet long and 10 feet across, that was the only place that we were allowed to talk about classified information inside that room, because it had a bunch of wires and antennas and stuff that would keep enemies from eavesdropping on us, especially when we're in foreign countries. My experiences were in China and Russia and some of the other countries that hate us. So we had to be very careful. The first thing we did when we left that SCIF was, guess what? Run over to our phones that were in the pocket and check them. We could not only bring our phones in there, we couldn't bring our Apple Watches, we couldn't bring laptops, and I know this is going to shock some people, but we had these things called beepers. Does anybody remember beepers? All the kids are going, what? Well, beepers were about half the size of this, and all they do would beep at you, and it was telling you to call this phone number, and you would have to call and talk to a real person operator who would then give you the message. So we've advanced a little bit since then. They actually went digital for a while. We thought we were pretty high dollar, but we eventually went to phones. But you could not bring anything electronic in, but as soon as it was over with, we ran to our phones to see what we missed. I want to do one more quick survey for you. Have any of y'all ever lost or left a phone somewhere? Raise your hands, please. If you've ever, all right, enough people. A lot more this time. Was that your hand up, Father? Okay. Remember that feeling of panic when you realized that you didn't have your phone with you and you were gone from somewhere? That was like a sense of urgency, wasn't it? I mean, it made you just feel vulnerable because you couldn't call anyone if your car broke down or something happened. So that feeling of panic, of separation, is exactly what Jesus is telling us today in the Scripture. For those of you wondering when I was going to start my homily, Jesus is teaching us that's the feeling we should get when we're no longer connected to God. God is the real source of power. In John's Gospel today, you just heard me read that the metaphor that he uses was the branches and the vines to teach us that God is something that we can't do without in our lives. At the time in the area where Jesus was preaching, people would have understood his use of the concept of grapevines and branches in his teachings. In this gospel that I just read, Jesus tells us that a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine. So neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in Jesus. He is the vine. We are the branches. The vine and the branches are one. There is no branches without the vine. Scripture teaches us whoever remains in Jesus will bear much fruit. But without him, his words, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in him will be tossed out like a branch that's cut off the vine. It withers and is thrown into a fire. Now that thrown into a fire would mean something to you because we've heard that mentioned a few times in Scripture. Well, here's my suggestion. Instead of us being so concerned about what's appearing on Instagram, TikTok, X, or whatever else is out there, I don't know, and instead of worrying about how many likes or hearts that you have, by the way, there's a reason that those emojis are so addicting. They were created by scientists to do exactly that. But instead of connecting with your cell phone, try connecting with God instead. That doesn't mean it has to be a novena. It doesn't have to be rosary. It doesn't have to be certain prayers. Yeah, please do it if you can, but just connect with God. However you can, connect with him. Talk to him. One of my favorite things about doing when we did after confirmation, I'm getting old, when I interview the 8th graders for confirmation and you ask them the set of questions you were supposed to, one of my favorite questions is, what does you think God look like? What do you think God looks like? And one of the best answers I ever heard was, I think he looks like my favorite grandparent. And I like, why is that? He goes, because whenever you talk to him, you just light him up. It doesn't matter if it's a phone call, a text, or an email. It means so much to a grandparent. And that's the way they pictured God, and I love that example. God just wants to hear from you. So hopefully this gospel reading will remind us that whenever we check our phones, to ask ourselves, have we checked in with God today? Is this nourishment that we get from Jesus more or less nourishing than what checking in with a social media app? I do know what happens when we don't check in with God, who is the ultimate source of power, because Jesus has told us in Scripture. Jesus also taught us that we can't get to heaven alone, although some of us would like to think that we can. The fruit of the vine is not used by the vine itself, but those grapes are given to nourish others. If we are not connected to the vine, we will not bear fruit, and we won't provide anything nourishing to the world. We just heard Jesus say, we will be cut off, withered, gathered, and thrown into the fire. Let's keep that one in mind, because there's not really much interpretation there, is there? Maybe we can use our constant checking of our cell phones to remind us to say a quick prayer, or maybe put a prayer app on our home screen so we see it every time we look at the phone. I personally am a huge fan of 2 apps, and there's many more than that. Hallow, H-A-L-L-O-W. You can try it for a week for free if you like it. It's a minimum subscription, and it has all kind of prayers that you can imagine. It's full of great apps. the guy that actually plays Jesus in my second app, which is The Chosen. The guy who plays Jesus in The Chosen also is on Hallow. And of course, I've spoken of Chosen for years now here. Just so you know, it's a free app. You can put it on your phone. The gospel comes to life in amazing acting. It has reached over 650 million people around the world in over 40 languages, and it's free. It's called The Chosen. I hope you check it out. Make that on your cell phone to get something very positive out of it. We need to realize that Jesus is talking about life and death in this scripture. Isn't that more important than getting a thumbs up or a like from some make-believe friend or total strangers? Today, I challenge all of us to find ways to be more dependent on Jesus and less dependent on addictive technology. After this Mass, see how long it takes you to check your phone. If you haven't been checking it during my homily, which I think I saw a few, I know you might be reading the scripture. I understand the readings are on the phone. But when you do check your phone, how about setting a daily reminder on there to remind yourself to also check in with God? Don't want to forget this.